Welcome to Voices of Eternity, the channel where we discover deep lessons, hidden truths, and inspiring narratives found in Scripture. Today, we will explore the story of Moses and the true reason why he was not allowed to enter the Promised Land. Moses, one of the most revered leaders in biblical history, was chosen by God to lead his people from slavery to freedom. However, even with his unshakable faith and extraordinary achievements, there was a time when human emotions and disobedience interrupted his journey. As the Israelites' journey through the desert continued, the scarcity of water became a constant shadow on the camp. The merciless sun punished the dry earth, and the animals sought in vain for some source to satisfy their thirst. The murmuring between the people grew every day, fed not only by the lack of water, but also by the uncertainty of the future and the painful memories of the past. The voices of dissatisfaction echoed through the arid valleys, creating a climate of despair and distrust. Moses, aware of the growing restlessness among the Israelites, sought ways to calm the exalted spirits. However, the task was not just to provide water for the thirsty bodies, it was also to restore shaken faith and hesitance in the God who had released them. In this scenario of tension and anxiety, Moses was facing an even greater challenge than opening sources in the desert. He needed to restore the faith and hope of that God chosen. Moses, amid pressure and urgent water need for the thirsty people, received a clear and specific divine instruction to speak to the rock. This was not a simple order, but a test of faith and obedience. The rock, a symbol of God's provision, was there before all as a reminder of the constant presence of the Creator. By heading to the rock in obedience to divine orders, Moses would have the opportunity not only to supply the physical thirst of the people, but also to reinforce confidence in the providence and power of the Lord. It was a crucial moment that required not only words, but unshakable faith and total submission to God's will. Before the attentive eyes of the gathered people, Moses has prepared to fulfill God's designated task, knowing that his obedience could not only satiate the thirst of the Israelites, but also to strengthen the faith of an entire nation. The pressure on Moses was crushing. While the people clamored for water, he found himself facing a dilemma that went beyond merely supplying bodily needs. His mind was seized with doubts and worries, questioning not only his capacity to lead, but also God's fidelity and purpose in that barren wilderness. Each complaint resounded like a reverberation of suspicion within him, straining the bounds of his patience and trust. Amid the mounting turmoil, the gentle voice of the Lord felt far off, drowned by the clamor of insistent voices. At that moment of human weakness, Moses let frustration and fatigue steer his actions. Rather than turning to the Lord for counsel and strength, he yielded to the urgency of the moment and acted rashly. What ought to have been an act of assured obedience became a misguided deed, exposing the fissures in the revered leader's soul. The strike upon the rock resounded like a voiceless cry of anguish and despair, a failed attempt to appease not only the people's physical thirst, but also the spiritual thirst that afflicted his own troubled soul. The strain in the Israelites' encampment reached a breaking point when Moses, confronted by the grievances and murmurs of the parched people, was overtaken by an overpowering blend of emotions. The pressure to supply water amid mounting hostility pushed him to the brink of patience and faith. As the chorus of the crowd resounded in his ears, Moses faced not only the plea for water, but also the pall of doubt looming over his leadership. Each word of discontent was like an arrow piercing his resolve, straining the limits of his compassion and discernment. In a moment of frustration, Moses addressed the people not merely with words of reprimand, but with a choked cry of pent-up anguish. That fraught instant laid bare not only the leader's vulnerability before adversity, but also the inner conflict between the will to serve and the crushing weight of duty. As the thirsty crowd looked on, Moses gripped his rod, a steady reminder of the divine power with him. With a blend of resolve and unease, he neared the rock, its rough face reflecting the blistering desert sun. A taut hush hung over the camp, broken only by the muted sighs and murmurs of those waiting in hope. Moses lifted his rod resolutely, and, in an act of trust and obedience, went to the rock as God had commanded. His heart pounded in his chest as his words rang out across the parched valley. Expectation was palpable as he uttered the sacred words that invoked divine provision. Then, before the incredulous eyes of the crowd, the rock answered Moses, while clear water surged from its barren depths, pouring abundantly to quench the chosen people's thirst. The wonder of water springing from the rock was not merely a material supply. It was a concrete reminder of God's steadfast love and faithfulness to his people. As grateful tears mingled with the fresh water that relieved the Israelites, Moses once more beheld the Lord's power and goodness revealed in that relentless wilderness. God's rebuke of Moses and Aaron for their lack of trust and for failing to honor his holiness before the people became a moment of profound introspection. Moses' disobedience, though he was known for humility and unwavering faith, revealed a vulnerable side of his humanity. By letting frustration and pressure direct his actions, he briefly strayed from God's guidance, bringing consequences that would reverberate through Israel's history. God's declaration that Moses and Aaron would not lead the people into the Promised Land was more than punitive. It was a potent reminder of the need for obedience and complete confidence in God, even in the hardest moments. This passage calls us to examine our own posture in adversity, and to remember that faithfulness to God requires not only belief, but wholehearted submission to his will. The moment God declared to Moses and Aaron that they would not lead the community into the Promised Land became a watershed in Israel's history. This divine verdict was not merely punitive, but a weighty consequence of Moses' disobedience and lack of trust shown before the people. God's decree reverberated like a solemn echo across the wilderness, underscoring the need for absolute obedience and reverence for his holiness. For Moses, whose faith and humility were widely recognized, this ruling meant not only a literal barring from the land of promise, but also a spiritual disqualification from that long-desired destiny. The ban on entering the Promised Land not only marked the close of Moses' personal pilgrimage, it also stood as a sobering lesson to all Israel about the grave ramifications of disobedience and unbelief. This somber chapter in Moses' life would resound through generations, teaching that even the most devout leaders are not immune to the consequences of their actions before God. In the desert, water gushed forth. In the heart, God taught. Obedience is worth more than deeds, faith more than a staff. Moses did not enter the land, but he led a people to hope. May we, hearing his voice, trust before we act. If you found this inspiring and significant explanation, be sure to share your thoughts in the comments below. We look forward to your reflections, and we will continue this significant discussion.